Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing for you another recent reads video because it's been quite a while since I did my last recent reads video and I've read quite a lot since then, so we're definitely due doing one of these videos. Since my last recent reads video, I have read some children's fiction, some literary fiction and some historical fiction as well, so I think I'm bringing you quite a good mix. The first book that I read recently was a children's book, and that was Aminas Voice by Henna Khan. So this novel follows our protagonist Amina, who is a young American-Pakistani Muslim girl. And in this novel, we basically just follow Amina's day-to-day life over quite a short period of time while her uncle is visiting them from Pakistan. This is an absolutely lovely story that allows us a lot of insight into all of the different elements that make up Amina's life. So we get to see Amina at home with her parents and her brother, and how these dynamics change when her uncle comes to stay from Pakistan. We also get to see Amina's school life and her relationship with her best friend Sujin, as Sujin is actually receiving full American citizenship and is considering changing her name to something more American. And we also get to see Amina and her family attend their local mosque, and as Amina attends Sunday school, and just all these different things that make up Amina's life. On one level, this novel is just a lovely children's book that involves a lot of really relatable, everyday children's struggles. So we get to see Amina and her best friend go through some difficulties and arguments, and there's jealousy involved as Amina's best friend starts making friends with someone else. We get to see Amina's everyday disputes with her older brother, and there's also a singing competition which is going on at school that Amina really wants to attend and partake in, but she's a bit too nervous to. But this novel is also just a really great insight into what it is to be a Pakistani American Muslim today. Throughout the novel, there is a lot of insight into Amina's family's culture and a lot of the different rituals they do, but it isn't put across in a really info-dumpy way. It doesn't seem like Henna Khan is just wanting to educate you on the culture of this family. It's much more natural and just part of the story, which was really great. Obviously, in the current cultural climate, especially in America, this book is more important than ever. It holds some really important and serious messages, but it's really hopeful at the end as well, which I loved. And I just think it's especially great that it is targeted at the young audience that it is. So if you're in the mood to read some middle grade, or if you're just wanting to read something from a bit of a different perspective, then I would highly recommend this book. I absolutely loved it, and ultimately I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read, I actually listened to on audiobook, and that was The Immortal Lists by Chloe Benjamin. This novel follows 4 siblings who were all born around the 1960s in New York City, and when all the children were young, they hear that a travelling psychic woman has come to their neighbourhood and that this woman can tell them the dates of their deaths. So the 4 siblings decide to go to this woman and get their fortunes told and receive their dates, and they do so. And then the rest of the book follows these 4 siblings throughout their lives and basically just looks at how they live their lives based on the knowledge of their prophecies. So there was a lot to love in this novel. Firstly, I really love the scale of it. I love novels that focus on lots of different characters and focus on the characters over a long period of time as well, so you can see them at different points in their lives, and that was definitely the case here. The novel focuses on each of the 4 siblings in turn, and it follows their lives over a span of 5 decades. I thought the characters were pretty great in this novel. It was really interesting to see the ways in which they changed and the ways in which they stayed the same over the courses of their lives. And it was really cool to see the way they became unique and more distinct from their fellow siblings when they were quite young as well. But the strongest element of this novel was definitely its atmosphere. Like I said, I listened to this on audiobook, and I think that's the perfect way to consume this book, to be honest. It definitely has a very mystical feel to it and explores the theme of pushing boundaries quite a lot. One of the siblings grows up to be a Las Vegas magician, and she's obsessed with blurring the lines between reality and fantasy. And another one of the siblings also grows up to be a researcher, and she's often testing the boundaries between science and immortality. So those themes are just really interesting and quite prevalent throughout. But as well as all this, the novel is just full of really wonderful and vivid imagery, which really makes it come alive. So I really enjoyed this story. It didn't absolutely blow me away, and I didn't think any of the elements in it were executed brilliantly, but I did think it was really good and I thoroughly enjoyed listening to it. So I would recommend it if you're interested in it, and ultimately I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read recently I received as a proof copy from the publishers, and that was Whistle in the Dark by Emma Healy. This novel is about a 15-year-old girl called Lana who goes missing while she's on a mother-daughter holiday in the country, and when she returns she is bloodied and bruised and very disoriented, and she claims that she doesn't remember anything about the 4 days in which she went missing. So this novel focuses in on the couple of months following Lana's return, and it looks at her family in their day-to-day lives, trying to adjust to everything that has happened, and it follows her mum in particular, trying to figure out what happened to Lana in the 4 days in which she went missing, and of course her just trying to check that Lana is okay after everything that happened. From quite near the beginning of this novel, we do know that Lana has had depression for a couple of years, and that is something that has been very serious and tumultuous in their family life, and it's something that her and her mum have tried to work through together. And it's something that has been a major cause of concern for Lana's mum. There's definitely trigger warnings for self-harm that come with this novel, so definitely bear that in mind before going into it. But mental illness is a strong theme in this novel, and I thought it was handled quite well. In many ways, this novel wasn't really what I expected it to be. I thought it was going to be a kind of thriller novel that much more focused on what happened to Lana, and I thought there would be a really big, satisfying reveal at some point. And there kind of wasn't that, and that did leave me a bit disappointed. But I've come to realise that that isn't really the point of this novel. The most impressive thing in this novel was definitely its depiction of family life and the bond between child and parent, and the care and concern that a parent feels for their child. It also presents really well the miscommunication that can happen in these kind of relationships, and how it can make those relationships so difficult. This novel also depicted really well how obsessed the modern world is with social media, which I thought was brilliant, that it didn't just skim over this. So it didn't ignore the fact that mobile phones and Twitter and Instagram are so prevalent and pervasive in people's everyday lives, and how much gratification we seek from them, especially teenagers, how their self-esteem and mental health often are linked to social media. I thought this book looked at that very well, and I really appreciated that, because I often find that novels set in the contemporary day ignore this element of contemporary life, but this book certainly didn't do that. This book is much more about family life and mental illness and social media than it is a kind of what happened book. So if that's what you're expecting from this, then you might be slightly disappointed, like I was. That being said, there were elements in this that were really good. I just didn't love it overall. So I ended up giving this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read recently was A Boy in Winter by Rachel Seifert. This is a historical novel that focuses in on a small Ukrainian town during World War II, as the SS takes it over. I buddy read this one with my friends Laura and Renee from Paperback Winter and Renee Pierre. I'll leave their channels linked down below. And I'm not going to go into how I felt about this one too much here, because I've done a separate video talking about it, so I'll leave that link down below as well, so you can go and check that out if you want to hear my thoughts on this one in more depth. Basically, I wasn't massively impressed by this novel. I thought it had some very strong points. I loved that it was set in Ukraine. I loved that it involved multiple perspectives. And I also loved that it was set over just 3 days following the SS invasion. I thought that was brilliant. But ultimately, I didn't connect with the characters very strongly at all, and I found it much less impactful than I thought I would. So overall, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read recently was How to Be Both by Ali Smith. I also buddy read this one. I buddy read this with my friend Jason over at Chapter and Verse. And like the last book, I reviewed this one separately, so I'll leave the video linked for that down below, and I won't talk about it in too much depth here. The 2 books I actually reviewed in the same video, so there'll just be one link. So this novel is told in 2 parts. One of the parts focuses in on George, who is a teenage girl living in modern day, as her mother has just passed away. and the other part follows a Renaissance artist of the 1400s. So this was my first experience of reading Ali Smith, and I loved it. Her writing is so inventive and playful and layered, and I was very impressed by it whilst I was reading. And I also really loved the themes that were explored in this novel across both parts, even though they were like 6 generations apart. It was just really cleverly and perceptively done. Ultimately though, I didn't quite connect with this novel as much as I wanted to, because I did feel like many of its intricacies went way over my head. I did enjoy reading it, and I'll definitely be reading more Ali Smith in the future. And in the end, I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. The next 2 books I read recently were both Roald Dahl, and they were James and the Giant Peach and The Twits. I reread both of these because I'm trying to reread all of Roald Dahl's books this year, and of course I loved them. I'm sure I don't really need to give you synopsises of these books because you probably all know what they're about already, but if you haven't and you don't know what they're about, then just take it from me, they're brilliant and definitely worth your time. I especially enjoyed rereading James and the Giant Peach because that's one that I used to read a lot when I was younger, and I actually used to listen to it on audiobook while I was falling asleep or while I was a kid, so that was a really fun rereading experience for me. So I gave both of these Roald Dahl books 4.5 out of 5 stars. And the final novel that I read recently was another literary fiction novel, and that was When I Hit You by Meena Kandasamy. This is currently on the Women's Prize for Fiction shortlist, and it's quite a lot of people's favourite to win, I think, and it's definitely the one that caught my attention the most off the list. This novel follows our protagonist, who goes unnamed, as she falls in love with and agrees to marry a university professor. But after the two are married, she quickly comes to realise that the marriage is much more about control and ownership for her husband than any kind of partnership, and he quickly begins bullying her into his idea of the perfect wife. He begins this process by discouraging our protagonist from writing and following her own career path, and also by controlling her phone calls and her emails. And as our protagonist resists this bullying and abuse, the violence only heightens. So there are definitely trigger warnings that come along with this novel for physical, emotional and sexual abuse and rape as well. So this is a very powerful book. Not a lot actually happens in it plot-wise. When the novel opens, our protagonist is already out of the abusive marriage, but she decides that she wants to tell her own story and give her own version of events, because it seems to her like everyone around her has their own ideas of what happened in her marriage. And so in the novel, she basically tells us how she got into the marriage and details the few months that she spent in it. I found this novel to be incredibly impactful and moving, as well as clearly being a comment on traditional marriage in modern day India. This book is also just generally a really powerful feminist text. So it looks at themes of love and trust and male ego and violence, but it also includes themes of politics and poetry. There's definitely a lot going on in here. This is just a very clever piece of writing in its language use, its ideas, its structuring, and I thought it was all executed brilliantly. I was definitely very impressed whilst I was reading it. So overall, I really did love this novel. I found it to be so powerful and impactful and extremely emotional while I was reading it. And of course, it's just very important. So I would highly recommend picking this one up if you've been considering it, and if you're interested in the Women's Prize shortlist, this is definitely one to give a go. And I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. So those are all the books I've read recently. If you've read any of them, then I would absolutely love to know what you thought of them down below in the comments. Chatting to you guys in the comments of my videos about the books that I've read is like my favourite thing to do. So thank you so much for watching this video, as always. I hope you're all doing really well and are all having really nice weeks, and hopefully I'll see you next week with my next video. Bye.